Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories Podcast. My name is Tim Hannon, and with me, as always, is.
Steve Wirt.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Tim.
On this episode, we're going to talk about the final games of some Pittsburgh sports legends. So, typically, when someone's career comes to an end, sometimes or mostly know that like this is going to be the last time you ever get to see this person play, but other times you don't. And I thought it'd be interesting just to look back at some of the final games of is really some of the bigger Pittsburgh sports stars, the ones that ended their careers with a Pittsburgh team at least, to see what those final games looked like for them. So we're going to start this with two Pirate legends, Roberto Clemente and Bill Mazeroski, because their final game was actually the same game. It's game 5 of the 1972 National League Championship Series, and it's the deciding game 5 because back then the NLCS was a 5-game series instead of a 7-game series. And the Pirates have a 3-2 lead over the Reds headed into the bottom of the ninth inning. But Johnny Bench hits a home run to tie the game, and then the Reds get a guy on third base with 2 outs. Bob Moose is pitching for the Pirates, and that is when disaster strikes. Steve, we're going to play this clip. See if you recognize the announcer.
And the 1-1 pitch to McRae. In the dirt, it's a wild pitch. Here comes Foster. The Reds win the pennant. Bob Moose throws a wild pitch, and the Reds have won the National League pennant.
No, I don't. It's not Joe Buck or Jack Buck. I mean, Joe Buck would have been like 5 years old, but I don't know.
It's Al Michaels.
That was Al Michaels?
The same Al
Wow.
Michaels who calls games 50 plus years later.
Well, yeah, what year was this? 72?
Yeah.
So he's not really famous yet.
He was the
He's
Reds
not going to get,
announcer.
what's that?
He was the Reds announcer.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Because like 8 years later, he's going to become famous with the, Do You Believe in Miracles?
Yeah. That's exactly right.
He tried to hit like the Giants win the pennant. He well, the Reds win the pennant. The Reds win the pennant.
He did. So yeah, kudos to Al Michaels. I'm pretty sure I have a clip of him somewhere calling the infamous Jack Johnson versus James J. Jeffries boxing match from 1910. Pretty sure he called that too. So anyway, as you heard Vampire Al Michaels say in that clip there, Bob Moose throws a wild pitch. The winning run scores, sending the Reds to the World Series instead of our Buccos. Roberto Clemente's in right field when all of this happens. In fact, that home run that Johnny Bench hit flew directly over his head. Mazeroski, on the other hand, is in the dugout. The Pirates' starting second baseman at this point is Dave Cash. And Maz does not get into this game. Perhaps he does if the game would have gone to extra innings. Johnny Bench ties the game, but then Bob Moose, instead of throwing a wild pitch, gets the guy out. And if that game goes into extra innings, I bet we see Mazeroski at that point because he's got to start using pinch hitters. But as it stands, he only has 2 at bats in that series. He pinch hit in games 2 and 4. He actually got a hit in game 2. Clemente's last plate appearance is an intentional walk in the 8th inning of that deciding game 5. So about a month later, Bill Mazeroski formally retires. Clemente actually tries to persuade him to spend the winter getting in shape with Clemente in Puerto Rico so that Mazeroski could play longer. But Maz declines, saying he was done fighting his weight issues. And weight had been an issue for Mazeroski all through his career. Way back in 1959, he had gotten injured early in the season. And while he was out of the lineup, he had put on a lot of weight, so much so that the Pirates actually decided to make players' weight a contract issue. And Maz has to start reporting to the Pirates office each week to get on a scale so they can monitor his weight. So by 1972, with his body starting to break down due to age, and Steve, I think for all of us who are on the other side of 40 know it's much harder to keep your weight in check as you get older. He just decides it's not worth it anymore. And then, of course, Clemente is killed in that tragic New Year's Eve plane crash that year.
That's kind of a sad footnote. to that game. Yeah. I didn't realize Maz struggled with his weight like that, but yeah, I don't know. Once you hit 40, something happens. It just, I don't know. The warranty runs out, I guess. Everything starts to break.
Yeah, that's kind of like the 75,000 mile mark on a car or something. It's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
gotta replace the engine or the transmission or whatever. So stuff starts to just go.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's the guy for the Reds who scored from third? Do we know? Was that
I think it was George Foster, but don't quote me on that.
okay? Yeah, it's
But-
a sad way to go. And what's his name? Moose. He had been the hero of the World Series the year before, hadn't he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you win some, you lose some, I guess. And that wasn't like people in sports like to boil things down to one moment. We've talked about that before, but I mean, first there was the home run, then there was, getting those guys on base and they'd switch pitchers. So it was just a whole comeback by the Reds. And, it's sad that that's
The
the way
Reds
it
are
ended.
good, yo.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they were, and that's what really
Did they win the series that year? Probably. 72.
I think they may have lost to Oakland. But I'm again.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
because Oakland was really good.
Yeah, but the Reds would get theirs later in the decade, and the Reds would knock the Pirates out of the NLCS. I think
They dominated the Pirates
2 or
in
3
this.
times in that decade.
Yes, Oakland, they won the 1972 World Series.
Okay. But yeah, that's
over-
Clemente and Mazeroski. Their last game was that game.
Hey, guess what? And they played that World Series at the Oakland Coliseum, which still stands to this day.
Yeah, I mean, stands is a strong word, but yes, you're right.
Exists.
Being held together by duct tape, I believe. So the next guy we're going to talk about on this list is Lynn Swann. Lynn Swann, of course, a wide receiver for the Steelers in the 70s. He had all those circus catches in the Super Bowl. He's a Hall of Famer, definitely an all-time Steelers legend. His final game is actually one that we did an entire episode on. It's the 1982 playoff game against the San Diego Chargers. So if you want more detail on that crazy forgotten game, we'll link to that episode on our website. But in terms of Swann's participation in that game, it's pretty limited, as it had been all season in 1982. Swann, at this point in his career, he's not very effective, and in that playoff game, he only has 1 reception. But in the final seconds, the Steelers are down by 3. They have the ball at midfield, and they have time for one final Hail Mary pass. So Terry Bradshaw drops back, and here's what happens next.
Now Bradshaw has to go for the whole bundle. 4 seconds left. Last play of the game. Is there another miracle in Pittsburgh? No. San Diego's Chargers have won 31-28.
So what you can't see in that clip is Bradshaw's flushed out of the pocket. He heaves a pass down the left sideline for John Stallworth that it isn't even close. In fact, it doesn't even land in bounds. And that's Lynn Swann's final play in the NFL. And years later, he speaks very bitterly of that play and the fact that Bradshaw didn't throw him the ball on that Hail Mary. And here's what Lynn Swann said, quote, John Stallworth is on the far left. I'm on the far right. Bradshaw throws the pass to John, and had John caught it in the most spectacular way, at the highest point John was able to reach for the ball, he still would have been 10 feet out of bounds. Now, if he throws it to the middle of the end zone, I can come from where I'm at least sell out, jump as high as I can, make the catch, grab the ball, whatever it is, try to make the catch, end quote. So basically Swann's upset because here it is, the last play of the game. It's a desperation Hail Mary. And, Lynn Swann obviously is a guy that many times over his career was able to outleap defenders for a pass. And yes, it's still going to be a low percentage play if you throw that ball in the middle of the end zone, but at least Swann would have had a chance to catch it instead of it being 10 feet out of bounds. And I don't know, Steve, like technically Swann is correct. I mean,
I don't
Bradshaw
think it
threw it way out
really-
of bounds.
I don't think it really mattered.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know. And Terry wasn't one that was afraid to throw interceptions. He wasn't like a quarterback that really cared about that stat. So
well,
I
it was
don't
a
know
Hail
why he didn't.
Mary. It's a Hail Mary. You're just chucking it as far as you can. The other
Well,
thing
I
that
think the key is that you want it to stay in the field of play at least.
sure. I mean, yeah, you at least with a Hail Mary, be nice if at least had a chance, right? Again, low
Yeah.
percentage,
That
but it'd be
had
nice
no
to have a chance.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
out of
no chance.
bounds. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, I think one thing that Swan doesn't account for is Bradshaw the pocket kind of breaks down here, and so I'm
He had
not
to
sure
run
that
to the opposite side of the field.
right. I'm not sure that Bradshaw really had a chance to sit back there. Like typically on a Hail Mary, they only rush a few guys, and you kind of have time to sit back there and chuck it deep. Bradshaw didn't really have that opportunity here because the pocket collapsed. Even though the Chargers didn't rush a bunch of guys, the pocket collapsed, and he did have to kind of roll out to the one side of the field. So maybe that influenced the play as well.
For sure. I think that's what happened was he was all the way on the other side. He's on the other numbers. So there's no way he can throw it all the way to the other side of the field numbers. I mean, that would have been like a 70-yard throw. I mean, that's pretty impossible. So, and it didn't even make the end zone anyway. I'm not sure he could make the end zone from where he was. He was standing on the Steelers 40. That'd have
Right.
been a tough ask.
Well, and he was still kind of being flushed out of the pocket. Again, he didn't have time to just like plant
Yeah.
deep in the pocket and throw deep. So why are we talking about this, right? Because okay, millions of NFL games end like that, where a team throws some kind of desperation Hail Mary and it's incomplete. Why is that relevant? Well, it is Lynn Swan's final play, and it's one that he's pretty bitter about. He already had some conflicts with Terry Bradshaw over, what he perceived as Bradshaw favoring Stallworth over him in terms of, who he threw the ball to. But apparently this was kind of the icing on the cake. And Swan says, quote, "To end my career and not have an opportunity to help us win that ball game. And then the ball was just uncatchable. I went into the locker room and I wanted to kill him." And that
Wow.
play apparently severs the relationship between Swan and Bradshaw. Swan says at one point many years later that the only contact they have is an occasional polite hello during events where they're both appearing. So it's significant for Lynn Swan, apparently.
I didn't realize it was that significant for Lynn Swan.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, again, great Steeler career. And I don't know. I don't know if Bradshaw has time to plant and he throws that ball in the middle of the end zone. Like you said, Steve, percentage of Swan catching it is slim, but does he feel differently because he had a chance to do it? Or what, like, where Swan and Bradshaw just had a bunch of conflicts and maybe that was just like he needed a reason. You know what I mean?
That sounds like the latter probably because it's pretty nitpicky to like, complain about a Hail Mary.
Right. The next guy on our list is Troy Polamalu, a guy who played his first ever NFL
Polamalu.
game. Yeah, Polamalu. Polamalu is a guy who played his first ever NFL game at Heinz Field against the Ravens. He had his signature NFL moment at Heinz Field against the Ravens, that pick six in the AFC Championship game. So it's only fitting that his career comes to an end at Heinz Field against the Ravens. In 2014, Polamalu is in his 12th season. He's clearly slowing down. He also misses four of the final 7 regular season games with injuries. I think, Steve, when you play at like 110 miles per hour, like Troy did, you're going to wear out.
Have the longest of careers. Yeah.
No, you're not. So sorry, got lost. But 2014 is actually a pretty memorable season for the Steelers. That was the year that Ben had back-to-back 6 touchdown games Remember that? We talked about that in
Yeah,
the episode we did
yeah.
about Ben. And then the season finale win over the Bengals gives them the AFC North division title that year. Unfortunately, that regular season finale also gets running back Le'Veon Bell injured. And when you combine that with the fact that backup running back LeGarrette Blount had walked out on the team a few weeks earlier, the Steelers literally do not have a running back going into the playoffs that year. In fact, they have to sign a guy off the street to start their playoff game against Baltimore. Steve, $10 if you can name the running back the Steelers signed to start that playoff game.
Yeah, I think we've asked this before, and I still don't remember. I forgot his name as quick as you. Baron Batch? I don't know.
It's Ben Tate.
Ah, Ben Tate. Yes, the
Yeah,
immortal Ben Tate.
the immortal Ben Tate. So,
They
not
couldn't even
surprisingly,
sign like it got to be somebody better than Ben. Maybe not.
apparently there was not. I mean, you figure this isn't like signing a guy in training camp, right?
Nah,
This is
end of the season.
end of the season. So anybody that's going to be available is either going to be somebody that was cut during the season to make room on a roster, right? Or somebody
Well,
that
you
was
could have
just,
signed somebody off a practice squad, maybe if somebody was.
I guess, but I think Ben Tate at least had some experience. I mean, if you're going to sign a guy off a practice squad who doesn't really have any NFL experience, and you're going to throw them into a playoff game, maybe that was their thinking. Ben Tate does like fumble on I think like the second play from scrimmage, so maybe that logic didn't work anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, not surprisingly, the offense falters in that game, and the defense wasn't very good in 2014. The offense is really what carried them that season. Again, but Ben had put up all those huge numbers, so the Ravens win that game pretty decisively. I don't remember that being particularly close. For his part, Polamalu does make 8 tackles, but he really isn't a factor. And immediately after the game, reporters start blistering him with questions about retirement. And he just keeps patiently saying, time will tell. And guys, we just lost a playoff game. I'm not ready to think about that right now, right? He gives all the standard answers. But a few months later, Polamalu does formally announce his retirement from the NFL. It was reported that he wanted to come back for another season, and the Steelers told him he would be released if he did. Who knows how true any of that is, right?
He didn't come back to the Steelers for years and years after that.
Yeah, and again, like it's so hard to make of those kinds of things. Like Troy was not exactly like a football
It
deep
wasn't
guy.
Yeah.
Although
he was just back in Pittsburgh. I think they must have, because he just was back for a charitable organization. They did like a old timers game. Like it was him and Brian McFadden. Of course, they got Ben, they got Jerome Bettis, and they got all the old timers to play. So.
Yeah. 2014, coincidentally, also the final season for Ike Taylor, Brett Kiesel, and longtime defensive coordinator Dick LeBeau. Taylor and Kiesel did not play in that playoff game. They were both injured, and they both retired after the season. Dick LeBeau resigned, and then he went on to coach in Tennessee. In fact, the Titans actually tried to recruit Polamalu to come play in Tennessee, but he reportedly was not interested. So
that sounds like a Troy thing.
It does.
Yeah.
So one final footnote. That 2014 playoff game is also the final game in the career of Ben Tate.
He had played for Cleveland, apparently.
I think he played for the Giants too, I want to say.
Yeah.
I like vaguely remember him, but
he was like pretty mediocre on a good day. I think they just wanted like a veteran that wouldn't fumble, and unfortunately he was a veteran that did fumble. So
we haven't talked about any hockey players thus far, and there's a good reason for that. It's tough to get Penguins from this list because most Penguin legends did not play their final game in a Pens uniform. In fact, here is a list, Steve, of Hockey Hall of Famers who played for the Penguins, but played their final game for some other team. We've got Tim Horton, Andy Bathgate, Leo Boyven, Paul Coffey, Larry Murphy, Ron Francis, Luc Robitaille, Mark Recchi, Sergei Zubov, Jerome McGinley, Marian Hossa, Tom Barrasso. all Hockey Hall of Famers
That's
who
pretty
played
good.
for the
That's a pretty good
Penguins.
hockey team there.
It is. It is.
And
But
you
none,
get some donuts and coffee too.
you would. None of those guys played their final game for the Penguins. And if you're wondering why Jaromir Jagr's not on that list of Hall of Famers, it's
Still
because,
playing.
yeah, as the time of this recording, he's still playing and thus is ineligible for the Hall of Fame.
At 53. That's unbelievable.
It is. One legend who did, in fact, play his final game for the Penguins is Mario Lemieux. In fact, to make up for the lack of, guys not playing their final game for the Pens, Mario plays 2 final games for the Penguins.
Are you going to play both of them? Cool.
Well, let's talk about both of them. The first final game was in the 1997 playoffs. Mario had announced his retirement earlier that spring, and the Penguins weren't very good that year. And sure enough, they're down 3-0 against the Flyers in the first round. So on April 23rd, 1997, 17,355 fans packed the Civic Arena to see what they know could be Mario's last ever NHL game and almost definitely his final home game. And the Pens feed off that energy. They score 3 first-period goals. And as the game winds down to the final couple of minutes, the Pens have a solid lead. And all anyone wants is for Mario to get one last goal. And everybody is really hoping that we get down to like the last minute so that the Flyers pull their goaltender, and then that would give Mario a chance for an empty netter. But Mario being Mario, he doesn't need to be gifted no cheap empty netter. He's going to get that goal all by himself.
Here are the fans. Mario's on the ice now. Back to the point, Desjardins. Mario blocked it. Lemieux heading up ice. Here he comes. Here he comes. Mario Lemieux. Hang on. He scored. You gotta love it.
Yeah, that's just one of those moments. I'll never forget watching that. I was in my dorm room at Duquesne University, and it's just so perfect. Like you couldn't have written a better script than
Do
that.
you see the guy holding up his baby so he could like see over the crowd?
That's the amazing thing. We'll post
It's
a
a crazy
link.
scene. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll post a link to that clip. That always struck me about that moment is you have multiple. Remember, this was I want to say it was like a Thursday night. And that's when the playoff game started at 7:30. So this was probably, I don't know, 9:30 at night or something on a weeknight. And I guarantee you that those babies, it was all past their bedtime. and I just,
they weren't crying.
well, I know people, and there were multiple babies in that, if you watch the clip of that,
Yeah.
because I think what people did was they were like, I want to be able to tell this kid someday that they got to see Mario Lemieux play. Right. That was the whole point of that. And, because why else would you bring a baby to a hockey game on a later at night like that? And I think that was literally the reason why. So you could just tell them, hey, you actually got to see him play. You may not remember it, but you got to see him play. The Penguins then lose Game 5 in Philly, which is Mario's official final game. And then that night, hell literally freezes over as the Philadelphia fans give Mario a huge standing ovation at the end of the game. So I'll say a lot of negative things about Philadelphia and their fans, but kudos to them that night. Yeah.
Yeah, they were classy that night.
Yes. And that's the end of my praise for Philadelphia.
I like Philadelphia. I don't know. I think I fit in a little too well there.
So that's it. Mario retires. He's inducted into the Hall of Fame. He becomes the team owner. And then, surprise, he comes back to play hockey in 2001. We detailed that amazing story in a different episode. Again, we'll link that on our website. Unfortunately, Mario's second final game is not as dramatic as his first final game. It's an overtime loss to the Buffalo Sabres on December 16th, 2005. Mario does get an assist in that game on a goal by Ziggy Palffy. And then he quietly retires a month later after dealing with more injuries. So
Well,
interesting.
I'm thinking of Gretzky. What's the game against the Rangers with Gretzky? Was that Gretzky's last game?
Yeah,
I guess
Gretzky's
okay.
last game was against the Penguins, and Yager scores a goal in overtime. That's how Gretzky's career ended.
Okay.
Yeah, so not a Pittsburgh guy, but Pittsburgh was involved in that
Yeah.
final game. Mario's last game, it was very nondescript, right? It was just a regular season game, and that was the year that they
They went for
stunk.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the X-Force year. We did an episode about that too.
Yeah.
It was very even by December, it was already a hugely disappointing season. And so, and he played in that game, but then he was like, then he started having back issues again, and he was out of the lineup for a while. It wasn't like he got hurt in that game. It wasn't like there was a big hit or
Right.
something where he got hurt
Yeah.
or anything like that. It was just a normal game. And then it was like, oh, he's not playing the next game. And then it's like, oh, he's never going to play again. Right. You didn't know it at the time. So Mario kind of has like, it's interesting. He both has the experience of like a celebratory final game and the experience of a random regular season game that nobody knew was going to be his last one ever.
It is weird. Like, there are moments in your life where it's going to be the last time for something. And sometimes you can see it coming and and then there's other times it just happens. It's the last time, and nobody knew when you started that was going to be your last time. So
Yeah,
unpredictable.
that is interesting. I've seen like little memes on social media and stuff that say like, there was one time in your childhood when you and your friends got together to go
That's
out
what
and
I
play
was thinking
baseball.
about. Yeah.
And like none of you knew that was going to be the last time you would ever do that, right?
Yeah.
So a guy who had a similar path to Mario, an all-time, kind of beloved Steelers or Pittsburgh legend who got to play his final ever home game in front of the fans who knew it was his final ever home game. It's Ben Roethlisberger. And unlike Mario in 1997, Ben doesn't formally announce that he's going to retire after the 2021 season, but pretty much everybody knows that he will. So the Monday Night Football game in Week 17 against the Browns is going to be his last hurrah in front of the home fans. And the Steelers win that game. And afterwards, there's just this outpouring for Ben from the crowd at Heinz Field, as it was known in those days, back in 2021. It's it's a really memorable moment in Steeler history. I mean, I don't know, Steve. It's like one of those things I don't even know what to compare it to, right?
Did they come back to win that game too, or I can't remember?
I honestly don't remember much about the game. I just remember afterwards where he stayed on the field and he kind of made the rounds around the
like he walked around the edge of the field and shook everybody's hand and stuff.
Yeah. That's really what I remember most about that game. And I think honestly the amazing thing to me was it was a Monday night, and it was like probably around close to midnight by the time that game ended. I've literally seen people, Steve, leave the AFC Championship game early to beat the traffic. So to see people stick around for a regular season Monday night game, knowing that they would likely then sit in the parking garages or parking lots for another hour, probably not get home until 2 a.m, and then have to get up for work the next day. I think that just showed how much people really adored Ben.
Yeah, it's a big change from early in his career, but like we said, he kind of cleaned things up later in his career and life, and was able to become a beloved member of the Pittsburgh sports landscape, so to say. Like I said, he's even doing stuff with Troy and some of the other Steeler veterans, and those are always fun to see, the old timers games, even though they can't really run around too fast or do much of anything anymore, but it's always entertaining to see them. They don't do a lot of those old timer games. Have you noticed that, Tim?
Yeah, they used to do those a lot more back in the day.
Like I remember one when I was a kid, like Joe Gilliam was playing court. Like they had him and Terry on separate teams. Now it was flag football. They're not going to nobody's going to tackle like a 50-year-old person. Although we're quickly approaching that, Tim. You could tackle me in 2 years when I'm 50.
They they used to do a lot of the baseball games too. Remember that? Like the old timer
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's like not a contact sport. You would figure, there's highlights on YouTube of like old timers like hitting home runs, and it's not like they moved the fences in; they just played in a regular old field. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess people I know there's one where Willie Mays or Hank Aaron got hurt trying to field a fly ball, and
Mm.
so they kind of stopped doing that, I guess.
Maybe. Yeah. It would be interesting. I'd watch one of those. That would be just fun to watch. But
Even if it was like sometimes they'll do like a softball, like if they did like a softball one where okay, nobody's gonna get hurt today if you want to
Right.
go that far, but at least it'd be fun just to see that.
right.
And like too, now they mic everybody up, so it'd be hilarious to see some of the chatter that I'm sure, especially with like you got like in baseball like John Kruk or David Ortiz or Manny
Oh yeah.
Ramirez,
Some
like
of those
some of the real
personalities. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I'd love to see like Nolan Ryan in there. What's he like 81 or something? He'd probably still know everybody down.
probably.
Ben's so that was Ben's final home game. His actual final game is the playoff loss in Kansas City 2 weeks later, but the real memorable one was the one at Heinz Field. Of course, Ben is one of two all-time legendary quarterbacks in Steeler history. The other is a guy named Terry Bradshaw. So let's talk about his last game. And unfortunately, it's not quite the send-off that Ben has.
It's
In the
kind of like in the
spring-
category you didn't know it was coming. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep, for
Yeah.
sure. In the spring of 1983, Terry Bradshaw has elbow surgery, and there's reportedly a bunch of controversy around that. He has it done in Louisiana instead of by like a Steelers approved surgeon in Pittsburgh. And then there's reportedly the Steelers didn't even want him to get that surgery. Regardless, he has the surgery. It ends up sidelining him for the first 14 games of that season. But fortunately, the Steelers start 9-2 without him. So the Steelers have a really good start to the season without Terry Bradshaw, but then they lose 3 games in a row as new quarterback Cliff Stout proves that he's clearly not a guy who can take them very far, right? So they had won 9
Well,
games.
how'd they win 9 games with Cliff Stout?
I-
They had a weak schedule or something.
Yeah, and I think their defense was decent that year, and everybody always remembers like the team that they were building then didn't have a ton of success, but it kind of almost did because they start
Well,
9-2 and
84, they went to the
83.
championship game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And on defense, they had some really good players. Like some of the, and again, guys that no one would ever really remember as all-time Steeler greats because they didn't win anything. But you had like the David Little and Brian Hinkle, and you still had Donnie Shell back in the secondary. You had guys like that, Mike Merriweather. Like you had solid guys on defense, and then even like the running game. Like again, I know no one will remember Frank Pollard as like this great Steeler running back, but he had his moments. So they had enough to obviously to start the season 9-2 with Cliff Stout at quarterback. And so now in week 15, Bradshaw comes back in a game against the Jets, and he comes out firing. And man, what great timing, because the Steelers are going to go into the playoffs. Like their record was such that they had a good lead in the division. They were going to win the division. And back then, if you won the division, you automatically got into the divisional round of the playoffs. That's why they called it that. So, they're going to be in the playoffs with a healthy Bradshaw who's totally fresh, right? He doesn't have a whole season of wear and tear behind him. And maybe now they have a real shot at making a Super Bowl run. In the second quarter of that game with the Jets, Bradshaw leads the Steelers down the field, which sets up this play.
Steelers with a single setback in Harris. Bradshaw dropping back. Here comes the rush. Fires it down right near the goal line. It is pulled in by Calvin Sweeney for the touchdown.
So far, it's like old times. The Bradshaw magic back, and the Steelers are leading 14-0.
Yeah, just like old times, right? Except that Terry Rangers his elbow on that touchdown pass, and he never again sets foot on an NFL field.
even though the field he was playing on was Shea Stadium.
It was Shea Stadium. So yeah, that's a sad end to the career of an all-time legend, right?
Yeah, and I guess that last touchdown made him even with his interceptions because he's, he has exactly the same number of touchdowns and interceptions. He finished even for his career, so
wow.
He threw that last one. You can even see on the video clip that the ball didn't look right when it came out of his hand. Like it got there, but it wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
It kind of fluttered it in.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, like even it's not like he hurt his elbow and he went down and all the medical people rushed out. He's jogged off the field and you heard Myron Cope in the clip there. Like nobody even realized until the next series that he wasn't coming back into the game. And then even then it's like, oh, Bradshaw must have tweaked his arm or something. Well, we'll see what his status is for next week. And then he never plays again. So when you said, Steve, nobody knew it at the time, this definitely fits into that category. And it only gets uglier after that because Bradshaw says he feels like Chuck Noll rushed him back too early and that prematurely ended his career. And of course, there's been a ton of animosity between Bradshaw and the Steelers ever since. And talk about what ifs. Like, what if that surgery would have worked the way it was supposed to and his elbow would have been fixed? I mean, would the Steelers have made a run in '83? And then, like we said, what about the following year when they made it to the AFC Championship game with Mark Malone? Does Terry Bradshaw, is he able to beat Dan Marino in that game? I mean,
well, did the Raiders won this? Was this the year the Raiders won?
Yes, the Raiders won the Super Bowl, and the Raiders also eliminated the Steelers in the divisional round.
Because that was the first time a wild card team had won a Super Bowl.
No, that was 1980. 83, the Raiders were, I think they won their division. So the Raiders were good, but in that game was in Los Angeles that the Steelers lost in the playoffs. But again, that was Cliff Stout getting just manhandled by the Raider defense. So I don't know. I don't know what Terry Bradshaw does against the Raiders. I don't know what Terry Bradshaw does against Dan Marino in the AFC Championship game. But boy, who knows? Who knows what could have happened?
A lot of what ifs there. A lot of what ifs.
A lot of what ifs.
Yeah.
2 footnotes for Bradshaw's final game. It was also the final ever game at Steve mentioned, the aforementioned Shea Stadium. And at the time of this recording, the last time an NFL game was played in New York City.
That's wild, isn't it?
Yep.
Well, there was a year saw something where there was a year in '76 where they were remodeling Yankee Stadium, where all the teams all had to play at Shea, like Yankees, Mets,
Giants,
Jets, Giants.
Wow.
Yeah, all at one stadium, huh?
That's crazy.
Wild. Yeah.
The other footnote for this is a more of a personal one. We had this game on a Betamax tape when I was a kid, but somehow, and I can't remember like whose fault it was or how it happened, somehow it got taped over, and that was just a big thing in our family for years. Like
we didn't want to see, your brother's first communion anyway.
It wasn't taped over with, because we didn't have like a video camera till way later. Everything from the 80s in my family was on 8mm film, because that's the camera we had. So it wasn't even like we taped over it with something important. It got taped over with, like, I don't know, the Young and the Restless or something that my mom watched, right? Or
here's the MASH.
Right. So anyway, that was like a big deal in our family. So big scandal. Moving on to another Steelers legend, Joe Green. His final game is the last game of a disappointing 1981 season, in which the Steelers finished 8-8. That last game is at the Astrodome against the Houston Oilers, and it's a 21-20 Steelers loss. Joe Green plays, but he doesn't record a tackle or a sack. Here's some audio from that game.
There's a fellow who has played some extraordinary football in his career. We came out at the same time in 1969.
He's still playing.
Well, he's smarter than I am, too. But he didn't let me get to that.
So the announcer there is Gene Washington, who was the all-pro wide receiver for the 49ers, who is not still playing at this point.
No, didn't he work for the NFL at one point? Was that the same Gene Washington, or maybe not?
I don't remember, but yes, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Here is some audio from Joe Green's retirement announcement a couple of months later.
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed working with the Steelers. I've enjoyed Three Rivers Stadium, looking around and seeing those terrible towels and that maddening song that they played before before every contest. You know, it just kind of sends chills through you. The fans have accepted me, good and bad. I wasn't always the most pleasant person, but it was sincere. And again, they allowed me to be myself, and I don't think that I could ask any more than that.
Do you know what the maddening song he was referring to is, Steve?
Renegade.
No, not Renegade back then.
Since Renegade was it written even back in 1983? Might have been.
Yeah, I think that was.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but yeah, it wasn't Renegade.
It was the Steelers polka. It had to be the Steelers polka.
Oh, that's probably what he's talking about, I guess.
Oh, I thought you knew. I thought you
No.
really didn't know.
No, I'm legitimately asking.
Oh wow, I didn't know. I don't know what song he's. I just assumed it was the Steelers polka song.
Yes, actually, yes, Steve, that's what it is. I have it right here at my crack research.
Or your research team on crack. I don't know.
So Joe Green's final game is very similar actually to other 70s Steelers legends final games. It's a ho-hum 1980s season finale that's just not very memorable. That's also the case for Mel Blount, John Stallworth, Donnie Shell, and a lot of the other guys from that era. So again, sometimes the ending is storybook like Ben, sometimes it's brutally sudden like Bradshaw, and sometimes it's pedestrian like Joe Green and those other guys we just mentioned. Let's talk about the ending for Pirates legend Honus Wagner. What was his last game?
You should have a lot of video for that one.
Yeah. Not going to play a clip from that one, surprisingly.
What is it, like 1920 or something?
Well, let's get into that. In 1916,
Oh my gosh. World War
Wagner
I's raging, Tim. What are we gonna do? Will the United States join? Has Lusitania been sunk?
While all that's going on, Honus Wagner has just completed his 20th major league season, and he's thinking about, you know what, maybe I'm going to call it a career. He's still effective at the plate. In 1916, he finished his 8th in batting in the National League.
Holy cow, that's pretty good.
That's really good. He's 42 years old at this point, and he finished at 8th in batting. So, I mean, the guy was good.
Yeah.
Another thing happens around this time. Honus Wagner has fallen in love. He starts to see a woman named Bessie Bain Smith, who's a little younger than Honus.
That's literally a name from 1916,
isn't it? Bessie Bain Smith. Yeah, that's definitely.
I know with Bessie Bain down the street in Carnegie.
Yeah, she's 26 years old. As we said, he's 42. So there's
wow. Oh well, I mean today that really wouldn't be all that scandalous, but
I mean that's
they
not
thought of that. I mean maybe not in 1916. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a significant age difference, but I mean, people make those kinds of things work. And at this point, Honus and Bessie had been dating for several years, or he was courting her, or whatever the equivalent to dating was back then. He gave her father a mule as a dowry.
Yeah. He traded her 2 goats and
Yeah, I don't know. So point is, they get married that off season. So Wagner's eager to start a life with his new bride, but he does decide to come back for one final season in 1917. Unfortunately, it doesn't go real well. The Pirates lose 103 games.
Oh my gosh.
And finish in dead last. They also fire their manager halfway through the season, and owner Barney Dreyfuss asks Wagner to manage the team. So he does. For 5 games, at which point he decides, I am not cut out to be a manager. and he resigns as manager. He's still a player at that point, but he's like, I'm not a manager. Sorry. His final game takes place on September 17th at Forbes Field against the Braves. Wagner plays 3 innings, actually at second base, not shortstop, and he does not get an at bat in that game. So his career ends very quietly. But he and Bessie do go on to have a very long marriage. They're together for 38 years. They raised 2 daughters, and Wagner lives long enough to see the birth of a granddaughter, Leslie Wagner Blair, who I'm pretty sure is still living today.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
That is some wild stuff. Well, his granddaughter, if she's, well, I mean, she could be, well, she's got to be pretty old. Yeah.
This would have been like the 40s. So I mean, she'd be in her like
she's
70s.
pretty late 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. Fun fact about Leslie Wagner Blair, the granddaughter. Steve, if you're familiar with the Hannes Wagner statue that sits outside of PNC Park.
Yeah, I forget when they dedicated that.
Well, on the base of that statue, there's like a little girl holding flowers.
Is that her?
That's her.
Oh, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah.
So she's actually in the statue.
She's immortalized in stone.
She is. So that's Hannes Wagner's last game.
I think that was at Forbes Field too. I do believe
it was. Yeah, I think they moved
it's been
it
at
from
3 different stadiums
Yes.
now. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, because it was at 3 Rivers outside of Gate D, I think. I can't remember what gate it was outside of. C, but it was outside of one of the gates at 3 River Stadium, and now it's outside of like the home plate part of PNC Park.
PNC Park, yeah.
All right. Well, of course, we have to wrap up this episode with this guy.
Is this the last stop for the bus? You know what? It's been an incredible ride, and it's always a time when you have to call it quits. And I played this game to win a championship. I'm a champion, and I think the bus is the last stop is here in Detroit.
Well, it's home, 5th leading rusher, Super Bowl champion. Congratulations on a great career.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Detroit, on a great Super Bowl. Congratulations to the world champion, Pittsburgh Steelers.
If you didn't already know, that is Jerome Bettis, Steelers legend and Hall of Famer, retiring immediately following his final game, which was a Super Bowl victory in his hometown of Detroit. Pittsburgh will never again write a more storybook ending than that, right, Steve?
That's more the unbelievable like endings to a career and season and Super Bowl. I mean, you couldn't have seen that. I mean, we saw it coming, but I think that was so sad the year before because everybody thought he was going to retire the year before. And then, that's what made that 2004. That's still one of the worst. That loss was such a low the year before. And then this was such a high the year after to go from one extreme to the other in just, a season of football. I mean, unbelievable. Good for him. And it was great. And Detroit kind of adopted him, and the Steelers as their hometown team that week. And it was just great. It was great. It was just a fun time and special time. And, we'll always have that. And not a lot of players have gone out on top. John Elway, Bettis. I'm trying to think there's been other people. I'm trying to hockey, maybe Ray Bork.
Michael Jordan and one of his retirements.
No, he didn't. He played like crappily for like Washington.
Well, that's what I'm saying. One of his retirements.
Because I don't really count him because he stayed way too long.
Yeah,
then,
but that his second retirement, right? It was after they beat Utah in I want to say like the '98 NBA Finals. He retired, and then it wasn't until like 3 or 4 years later they came back to play for Washington.
Yeah,
so
it was pretty terrible.
Yeah, and that 2004 season, my dad always said he always felt like that 2005 wasn't like 2004 and 2005 were almost like one long season, like mashed together, because like the story of that Super Bowl really started when they drafted Ben in 2004, and that whole journey through that season. And like Bettis,
that team was so good in 2004. I always thought the 2004 team was better than the 2005.
It probably was. It probably was. It just, again, that's sports. That's sports for you. I mean,
James Harrison couldn't get on the field on
it
that team.
it happened.
They had
it ha-
James Harrison playing special teams.
It happened the next year too, Steve, because the Colts won the Super Bowl in 2006, but that 2005 Colts team was better than
Yeah.
the 2006 Colts team. That was the Colts team that was 13-0. I mean,
Yeah.
but then we upset them. So that's sports. That's just sports.
Yeah.
It just is. There really isn't a lot more to say about, the 2005 season, Super Bowl 40, that hasn't already been said by this show and elsewhere. So I try to find a different angle here. And I wanted to focus on one thing that people, I think, rarely talk about, which is, how did Jerome Bettis actually perform in that game in Super Bowl 40?
He was pretty mediocre. I think he had like 60 or 70 yards, I think. He
Yeah,
picked up a key first down late. I know that.
Yeah. So Willie Parker, obviously, at this point, had supplanted Bettis as a starter. And everybody remembers Willie Parker had that 75-yard touchdown that ends up being the game winner. But did you know, Steve, that Jerome Bettis actually has more rushing attempts than Parker does in that game? Bettis finishes Super Bowl 40 with 14 attempts for 43 yards with a long run of 12 yards. So like you said, nothing real groundbreaking there. But
They kind
also
of used him as a decoy too on the Ben touchdown.
they did. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, to your point, stats don't always tell the story. So that was an important play. And the other thing I always remember is that, the Steelers had the ball at their own 20 with 6 minutes left, and Seattle had all their timeouts. And Seattle needed 2 scores at that point, but 6 minutes, all their timeouts, they had a chance. And the Steelers end up eating 4 minutes off the clock, and they get 2 first downs, and that essentially ends the game right there. And Bettis was a big part of that.
Yeah.
He was gaining yards, and that was when the Seahawks had 9 guys in the box because they knew all the Steelers were going to do there is hand the ball off and try to make them use timeouts. And Bettis was still, gaining yards. And I feel like that was kind of a fitting end to his career, Steve, chewing up tough yards at the end of a game.
That's kind of what he did his whole career.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
He had
So-
some long runs though. People forget earlier in his career. He always had good feet and decent speed for a guy that big. So
He did. He for sure did. But yeah, that's how Jerome Bettis' career ends. Definitely, probably how every athlete would love to end their career
yeah,
the way
seriously.
that Jerome Bettis did. But as we detailed, sometimes it just doesn't happen that way. So that's our episode on final games. Steve, any final thoughts on our final games?
Well, all good things must come to an end. So you never know when something's gonna end. Could be.
Yeah. So you got to probably enjoy it while it's happening, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
that's
that's
the lesson in all of this.
Yeah, enjoy the players and teams that you have, and don't take anything for granted. So
For
there
sure.
you go. There's your life lesson, I guess.
The more you know. Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you so much for supporting our little show here. Please check us out on Facebook or on Twitter. We actually now have an option where you can text the show. That's in the show notes. And we'll catch you next time.